Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I often talk about how history can be viewed through various lenses. In other words, we can look at the same event and we can look at it through how it was impacted by interpersonal relationships. We can look at how it was impacted by finance and the economy, or by food, or by shipping lanes and trade routes, and all of these different ways in which we can understand history. And food is a big part of how we understand warfare, supply. You cannot have an army except that it marches on its stomach, right? You know, that was often said, and it's absolutely true. And that was true in World War II. And I saw that Max Miller over at Tasting History had a video that came out recently about what American soldiers ate during World War II, the B-Ration. Now, obviously, American soldiers are just one component of World War II, but it'll be an interesting way to look at the history of warfare through the lens of what they were eating in the field. So I'll put the link down in the description so you can check it out without my commentary. As always, I love his channel. It's a really cool way to look at history and learn some new recipes in the process. I want to thank Rebecca Gaskill for your support on Patreon. Thank you so much. Let's dive into this one.
Feeding the millions of American soldiers during World War II was a Herculean task that required an assortment of field rations, including the C-ration, the D-ration, and the K-ration. But today, I am cooking with the B-ration, an entire meal prepared from canned and dehydrated foods. So thank you to Trade Coffee for sponsoring this video as we make the kind of meal that was prepared in the American field kitchens of World War II.
So if he doesn't cover it, we'll take a minute and look over the different rations, because you're probably wondering right now, like, what's A, what's K, what's D, what's the difference, and what was the purpose of each one. So we'll talk about that, but I'm expecting he'll probably cover that.
This time on Tasting History. As I mentioned in last month's video on the D-ration, this is the beginning of a whole series about feeding the different armies of World War II. So let me know in the comments what army you would like to see next. But for today, I am cooking from the rather casually titled U.S. Army Technical Manual 10412. That is, the Book of Army Recipes from World War II. Specifically, I'm cooking from the B-ration section. See, most of the recipes in this book are actually for the A-ration, which is like fresh meat, fresh vegetables, fresh milk, that kind of stuff. The things that you would be eating on an army base well behind the lines.
Right.
But there is also a section on the B-ration, and these are the sort of meals that would be prepared in field kitchens shortly after forward movement or after a landing.
So what's fascinating about all of this, and anytime you start studying things like logistics in any war, and this goes all the way back. I mean, one of the reasons that Julius Caesar was such a fantastic general in his time 2,000 years ago is that he was really good at the logistics. And you know, if you all other things are equal, and you have equal sized armies that are equally well equipped and equally well trained and equally well led, the difference could very well be the one that's better fed, better supplied, and better equipped for the elements. And so, you know, for each army that was involved in World War II, you're going to have people that are in an office somewhere that are sitting down and looking at numbers and looking at charts and looking at supply figures and figuring out what's the best way to feed our army behind the lines, what's the best way to feed them on the front lines, what's the best way to feed them behind the lines, how do we get this stuff to them? I mean, there's so much involved here.
Meant using the 100 or so items of the B-ration, which were all dehydrated, canned, or otherwise preserved foods. As the section says, it will be necessary under conditions in the field to have only B-rations or a similar canned ration. At such times, the cooks will find it convenient to have recipes to vary an otherwise monotonous menu.
Yeah.
But even with these limitations, it was always the goal of the cook to provide each meal with at least one meat and 2 vegetables or fruits, as well as some dessert and a beverage other than water. So that is what I am going to endeavor to do, starting with recipe number 880, Vienna sausage and beans.
Wow.
Now you'll notice that this recipe is for 100 people, so you're using pounds of beans and measuring things in number 56 dippers, which is that big old dipper back there. I don't need that much, so I'm going to cut this down to about 10 servings, for which you will need 1 pound or 450 grams of white beans, 2 tablespoons or 14 grams of dehydrated onions, 2 slices or 70 grams of bacon, 2½ cups or 500 grams canned tomatoes, 1 1/3 cup or 375 grams of canned tomato puree, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon dry mustard, 1 tablespoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, and 1.2 pounds or 545 grams of Vienna sausage.
Now multiply this times millions of men, because that's what you're dealing with each of these armies. The U.S. had millions of men and women in the field in various places. The Soviets, the Germans, the British, the French, the Polish, the Italians, and so many other nations. And they've all got to figure out how to get this stuff to where it needs to be. And this is one meal. And you don't want to do the same thing every time, so now you've got to multiply that times different kinds of meals. I mean, I just can't even wrap my mind around this.
So you want to start by soaking the beans overnight and then add them to a pot and cover them with 3.2 cups or 750 milliliters of boiling water. Then set this over medium heat and simmer for 1 hour, adding more water if you need. You don't want them to burn or to get too mushy. While they cook, add 1/3 cup or 95 milliliters of water to the dehydrated onions and let them soak for 20 minutes. Then dice the bacon up and toss it into a hot pan along with the now rehydrated onions and cook these for a few minutes or until they start to brown. Then you can add in the tomatoes and the tomato puree, the sugar, the salt, pepper, and mustard, and stir everything together and let it stay warm until your beans are fully cooked.
I just want to express an appreciation here that there's at least an attempt being made by the Army to make something that's not only going to be nutritious, but is also fairly edible, right? I mean, they didn't have to add mustard. They didn't have to add the onions, but you're adding things to try and give it some flavor, because morale is such a huge part of keeping an army going in the field.
At that point, you can add the tomato mixture back in with the beans. Here you might also need to add a little more liquid just to make sure nothing burns, but you're also not making a soup here. Let this come to a simmer and cook for another 30 minutes, then chop up your Vienna sausage into inch-long pieces and toss them in, and then simmer for another 20 minutes. And that is the meat and vegetable part of the meal. Now for a beverage, I wanted to make something other than water, and there are several different options. One of the most common, of
lemonade,
course, was coffee. As one Army colonel put it, of all the drinks, meals, and other fuels I have experienced in my life as a soldier, it is coffee that stands out as the standalone drink of choice and remembrance. Of all the necessary assets and material, a cup of hot coffee competes with ammunition as a crucial soldier commodity.
Think about today. I mean, look at the lines. When I drive out of here, there's like within 10 minutes of my house, there's 5 Dunkins. And every one of them's got a line wrapped around the building in the morning, every day of the week. People need their coffee.
Of course, many soldiers were reduced to drinking soluble coffee, instant coffee, which came in little containers like that. But in the B-Ration, they would have had proper coffee that could be made for many, many men. Now, while the men could have had coffee, I decided to go with something a little more interesting in this book, a little different. So I'm going with recipe number 803. Pineapple milk.
Interesting.
And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's pineapple and milk. So for this, what you'll need is 1½ cups or 160 grams of powdered milk, 1/4 cup or 50 grams of sugar, 2¼ cups or 530 milliliters of water, and 3 cups or 710 milliliters of pineapple juice. And making this one is nice and simple. All you do is whisk together the powdered milk and the sugar and then add it to the water. Dissolve this by whisking it in and then add the pineapple juice.
Wonder what that tastes like.
Mix it all up and then, if possible, chill before serving. Now, we do have one more dish to make. It is an apple and cranberry sauce. It's not really a sauce, but
sounds good.
Before we do that, make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you can keep watching the rest of this World War II series as I look into the other rations that would have been feeding U.S. troops during World War II.
And this is a great point to make, and this isn't just about my channel or his channel or any in general, but I've heard from a lot of people on different channels that they thought they were still subscribed and they weren't anymore. So double check that you're subscribed when you're watching a channel, whether it's this one or any other that you think you're subscribed to, but also turn on the notifications, because with all the AI stuff these days and all the pushing of shorts and stuff like that, it's much harder to know when people upload, and I have people tell me that they haven't seen my stuff recommended for months. So if you turn on the notifications, you'll know whenever I upload. Anyway.
The dining experience of an American GI was very different from that of pretty much everyone else fighting in this war. As one British officer put it, the food of the Americans was lavish to the point of extravagance. And that extravagance was actually referring to the B-Ration, which wasn't even the highest quality ration that the Americans had available to them. See, they were usually called alphabet rations because there was the A ration, the B, the C, the D, and the K ration. And generally, they went down in quality the further down you went. Not exactly, but generally. And the A ration was the top quality, though. That was essentially what the men would have been eating back at home. It was all fresh ingredients. In fact, sometimes it was better than what the men would have been eating back at home.
Yeah, you have to figure that some of these guys are, we're talking about the 1940s. We're at the start of World War II, you're still in the Great Depression. And a lot of people are coming from places in the country between the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl and everything else that's happening, where they're just getting by and they have not had great food maybe in their whole lives growing up. I mean, because these guys would have grown up in the Depression. Most of these World War II soldiers are like 8, 10, 12 years old when the Depression starts. So this is all they've known.
There was a book in 1943 called When Your Son Goes to War, and it actually reassured mothers that they were getting the food that they were accustomed to having back at home, specifically fresh milk. It said that the Army was aware that this generation of boys had been brought up on milk as a definite item of diet, and that ample provision has been made for fresh milk for every man at every meal while in camp. And in addition to the freshness of the ingredients, it was the sheer quantity of the food that was so typically American. The amount of meat given to the average serviceman was 234 pounds per year, nearly 100 pounds more than the average pre-war civilian was eating. And the number of overall daily calories was a staggering 4,300 during training and when in base.
And the U.S. was not only supplying food to its own soldiers, but we were supplying food to our allies, especially the Russians, the Soviet forces. They were getting a lot of not only equipment, but also food to keep their soldiers going.
Men at the front were meant to receive over 4,700 calories, 700 more than the German combat ration, and double that of the Japanese. However, the bulk of the calories out in the field were not coming from fresh ingredients, but canned and dehydrated ingredients of the B-Ration. The B-Ration was meant to be able to be transported without refrigeration and prepared on the M1937 field range and the M1942 field oven. It was canned meat, dehydrated fruits and vegetables, dried eggs, dried potatoes, powdered milk, and stuff like that. A fully stocked B-Ration was made up of 100 different ingredients and would provide 5 pounds of food per man per day, including at least one dessert in one of the meals each day. But despite the fact that it was more varied and more food in general than all of the other powers were eating at the time, it didn't stop some Americans from grumbling about it, especially after they had been eating all these dehydrated foods for quite a while.
Well, listen, I mean, when you're in the Army, when you're in anything in life, at some point you complain. You complain about your job. You complain about the guy next to you. I mean, we do that in life. I'm not saying it's right or we should, but it's just human nature to grumble about things. And we see that if you've ever watched Band of Brothers. You see the scene where they're in the mess hall and they're eating spaghetti and everybody's really excited about the spaghetti, but then they're like, this is orange. Spaghetti's not supposed to be orange. And then the one guy says, well, it's not spaghetti. This is Army noodles with ketchup. That's what you do. You complain.
One sailor in 1945 in the Pacific wrote home to his family, "Dear Mom and Dad and all, I sure wish we'd go in port. Been a long time since we've been in. Longest time out since Saipan. We ate rice and spam for 2 weeks there, 3 meals a day. Isn't quite so bad this time. We got on some fresh eggs yesterday, so we'll have one good meal anyway. Everything is dehydrated or powdered. And you know how I hate potatoes at home? Well, you can imagine how I love the things dehydrated." Now, the field ration A and B actually made up 79% of the calories eaten by the men during the war. So it was the vast majority.
Yeah, and that goes to a larger point, too, is that by and large, throughout the war, and we're talking, just in the U.S. military, 15, 16 million people in uniform during the war, the vast majority of those were not on the front lines fighting at any given time. especially the first couple of years of the war. Yes, there were some that were at any given time, but most of those 16 million were either being rotated in and out of combat, they hadn't gone to combat yet, they were training, they were in logistics or other duty that didn't involve being on the front lines, and so for the most part they had access to these better rations.
But I would say that the C-ration, or C-rat, was the most representative of World War II rations. This was developed by the Subsistence Research Laboratory in Chicago in 1938, and the C-ration was designed to be fully edible without the need for cooking. They were full meals stored in cans that provided an alleged 3,700 to 4,000 calories a day. And the quartermaster at the beginning of the war said that the C-ration had all the vitamins, fuel, and regulating foods, and is far better in edibility and palatability than any meal that can be cooked in a peacetime army mess, let alone a rolling kitchen in gas and shell attack.
And this was never meant to be anything but temporary in those hopefully rare situations where men were actively on the front lines and couldn't have access to field kitchens. A couple of days at most, but obviously we know that reality means something different.
The issue with this is that it's not exactly true. First of all, the calorie count turned out to be wrong. They had miscalculated, and it turned out to only be about 2,000 calories, so roughly half of what they were looking for. So they essentially doubled the amount and added in the D ration to get close to that 4,000 or even sometimes up to 4,500 calories per day. And the D ration was an emergency chocolate bar that I covered last month, so I won't go into that, but I'll make sure to put a link to that video in the description. The other issue is that quartermaster claim that the C-ration is far better in edibility and palatability than any meal that can be cooked in a peacetime army mess. That is an absolute lie. They were not as good, palatability especially, as a freshly made meal. That's just silly. Why would you even claim that? In fact, the C-ration was probably the most universally despised ration of the war. It was made up of...
It also is being given to you at a time where you're under the stress of combat. So just one more reason to hate it.
6 cans of food per day, 2 for each meal. One can was dubbed the M unit because it contained meat. And at first there were 3 options: beef stew, pork and beans, and meat hash. The meat inside all 3 varieties were minced so fine that they were actually referred to as meat particles. Yum. It wasn't until 1944 that they started adding in larger pieces of meat and still maintaining the calorie count.
Right, so I mean, the only thing with the particles is I'm sure there was a good reason why they did it that way. Maybe they were trying to hide what kind of meat it was. I don't know, but it feels like morale would take a hit from that.
The lack of variation was also a major gripe amongst troops, and so in December of '43, they added ground meat and spaghetti to the lineup. The following summer, they added chicken and vegetables, ham, egg, and potato, frankfurters and beans, and ham and lima beans, the last being the most disliked by troops through this and the Korean War. By the end of the war, they had 10 different meat options, none of which was particularly beloved, but they got the job done, especially if they could be heated up. Some soldiers had access to small sternos that they could use to make little stoves to warm up the cans. Other stories include heating the cans on warm Jeep manifolds or even tank engines.
And you might say, well, why not fires? Well, the whole point of these meals is that they are used in a time when you're close to contact with the enemy and can't have a standard fire or a standard cooking arrangement. And so you probably also can't have fires because it's going to draw attention.
But more often than not, the canned meat was eaten cold or, during the Battle of the Bulge, frozen solid. Now, the second can for each meal was called the B unit because it contained biscuits. And along with the biscuits, there was an assortment of optional little goodies, things like candy or chewing gum, cigarettes, chocolate, sugar, water purification tablets, soap, or a P-38 can opener, among other things. By mid-1944, some even included the highly coveted item of toilet paper. Then they would also have something to make a beverage.
You know, you take stuff like that for granted, but man, you're out in the field for very long without toilet paper, and holy cow, does that make a difference when you get it.
Cocoa powder or soluble coffee was common, as was synthetic lemon powder to make lemonade. Now, a full day's ration would be 6 cans, and it could weigh up to 5 pounds, and it was rather bulky. So it was kind of hard to carry them around, especially because the soldiers often carried 3 days of them around with them. But that's the most that they would carry typically, because you were expected to only have to live off of these rations for up to 3 days.
Right.
By then, they figured that backup would arrive with B-rations so that more palatable meals could be made.
And that's always the intention. The people sitting back that we talked about earlier that are planning this stuff on paper, they're thinking this is the best case scenario. But they have to know even then that there are going to be scenarios. The Battle of the Bulge is a great example. Scenario where unexpected things happen and you end up surrounded, you end up in contact with the enemy far longer than you were supposed to be, and you're on this stuff for far longer.
And then after 2 to 3 months, A rations would come in. At least that was the theory. In practice, it was quite different. During his time on the Isle of Peleliu in September of 1944, Corporal E.B. Sledge of the 1st Marine Division lived off of the C-ration for nearly a month. And he did so under horrific conditions. It was essentially during battle the entire time.
Hey, and shout out if you're watching Henry and Andrea Sledge. I know that's Eugene's son and daughter-in-law. I'm friends with Andrea on Facebook. I don't know how that happened, but I know they're fans of the channel. So, hey, if you're watching, hope you're doing well.
And so there were flies everywhere brought on by rotting rations and rotting corpses. Those nasty insects were so large, so glutted, and so lazy that some could scarcely fly. They could not be waved away or frightened off a can of rations or a chocolate bar. Frequently, they tumbled off the side of my canteen cup into my coffee. We actually had to shake the food to dislodge the flies, and even then, they sometimes refused to move. I usually had to balance my can of stew on my knee, spooning it up with my right hand while I picked the sluggish creatures off the stew with my left.
And his book, if you have not read it, one of the absolute best to understanding what the experience was like for the common Marine in the Pacific.
They refused to move or to be intimidated. It was revolting, to say the least, to watch big fat blowflies leave a corpse and swarm into our C-rations. Now, while not giving as vivid a description, many of the men who landed in Morocco during Operation Torch in November of 1942 had to survive solely on C-rations for up to 90 days.
Jeez, and this is the first time that U.S. troops are going into combat in kind of the European and Mediterranean theaters. You have the Pacific, and then you have the theater against Germany and Italy, and this is the beginning of that.
90 days of canned food, and the canned food was often said, at least on the meat ones, to have this red-gray kind of sludge that was the fat floating on the top, and it would spill out and leave these stains on their uniforms that would then go rancid and smell horrible before the next time they could actually wash their uniforms.
So remember, this is the first time that you're sending troops as the U.S. into combat in any large scale in World War II, and it's the first time since World War I that you're sending large numbers of troops into combat. And so you're learning on the go, and this stuff that has been planned on paper is now being experienced in the field.
On top of that, the ration was said to wreak havoc on the stomach. One commander from that campaign said that after only 3 or 4 days, his men suffered spells of nausea and digestive disturbances. So before they went to Sicily in 1943, where he knew again they would have to go for possibly weeks or months just eating C-rations, he had all the landing vehicles packed full of B-rations so that they could make some decent meals like the one that I'm making today once they got to Sicily. And it worked. They were able to actually do that. Now, another issue with the C-ration, besides the fact that they made you sick, was that the fact that they didn't taste good. And so very often between that and the fact that, when you're in a combat situation, your appetite goes down, many of the rations were being thrown out half-eaten. During the Anzio campaign in Italy, the rapid weight loss of many of the frontline soldiers revealed them to be eating between 400 and 1,800 calories per day. Not nearly enough. And so
that's not enough for an average man in his daily life, let alone under the exertion of combat situations in a place like Italy where you're fighting in Anzio. I mean, you're dealing with some of the most difficult fighting that took place during the war.
This prompted an experiment to be done by one of the quartermasters during the action at Monte Cassino. And this experiment, to me, the conclusion is like, well, no duh. But you got to remember, this is a time when the people in charge were saying that the C-ration was just as good, just as delicious and nutritious as a home-cooked meal. So with that in mind, the quartermaster was like, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a bunch of the small field kitchens, the company field kitchens, together and make a big bakery. Bakers made such pastries as fruit turnovers, donuts, cookies, cinnamon.
This is what I love about these stories, is that you have the translation of what worked in an office back in Washington to what works in the field, and you have people getting creative and making do with what they have been given, but adjusting it for the field. And this is where you get innovations. And then hopefully that gets communicated back to Washington so they can make those adjustments for all your other soldiers.
Rolls and chocolate cakes. At the same time, each company kitchen prepared sandwiches of hamburgers, ham, egg, cheese, and jam, arranged for the packing and delivering sandwiches, pastries, and fruit juices to the unit's fighters. And they were sent via jeep and mule up to the men who were fighting, and they were, of course, greeted with elation. Again, no duh. You couldn't know that, I don't know. But it was a shock to many. And they took this knowledge and applied it to the D-Day landings later that year.
There you go. I mean, and just imagine, it doesn't seem like much to us sitting in the comfort of our homes. But think about when you're in a grueling campaign, a place like Monte Cassino. I mean, the fighting there was brutal and difficult and difficult terrain. And somebody shows up with really good, like way better food than you've been experiencing. That's a morale boost. That's an encouragement. That's just that little bit of extra that you need to keep going.
Knowing that a varied diet and more fresh food was necessary to keep morale up. It's really amazing the effect that food has on troop morale, on morale in general, but troop morale specifically. I actually did an entire video a few years back on the importance of ice cream in the Pacific. They had an ice cream barge, actually, bringing ice cream to all of the men in the Pacific. And another thing that really brought morale was access to Coca-Cola. They could buy it in certain bases. And its importance was really well put by one soldier who said, to have this drink is just like having home brought nearer to you.
There you go.
It's things such as this that all of us are fighting for. God, country, and Coca-Cola. Now, the other major rations from the war were the 5-in-1 and 10-in-1 rations, and those were essentially B rations, but they were repackaged to be an entire day's rations for either 5 or 10 men that could be prepared. And then there was the K ration. These were boxes of rations originally meant for paratroopers. And I'm not really going to go into detail on those because I'm actually going to do an entire video on them, because I got several of them, and they are actually filled with the foods that were in there during World War II. They are not from World War II. That is the realm of Steve MRE, but they are made using all the recipes from the time.
Very cool.
I'm going to open those up and try those and discuss about the K ration. But for now, I'm going to go back to the B ration and make one last dish, and that is the dessert for our meal. It is called apple cranberry sauce, but it's really more of a compote. So to make recipe number 893, what you'll need is 1 3/4 cup or 110 grams of dehydrated apple nuggets, 1/4 cup or 25 grams dehydrated cranberries, and 1 heaping cup or 225 grams of sugar. So start by rehydrating the apples in 2.5 cups or 600 milliliters of water for a half hour, and then mix those with the dehydrated cranberries and another cup or 235 milliliters of water. Set this on the stove and bring it to a boil, then reduce the heat and simmer for 15 minutes, and then stir in the sugar and let it continue to simmer for another 5 minutes.
Sounds good.
Then let it cool and you are ready to serve. And here we are, a full meal of B rations to feed the American troops of World War II. So I'm going to start with the Vienna sausages and beans, kind of tomato-y sauce in there, Franks and beans. So here we go.
He's not a fan. He's not a fan. He's going to try to spin this as positively as he can, but he does not look thrilled with that. He's saying nothing.
The texture thing. Flavor's fine. Nothing amazing, but I don't think I've ever had a Vienna sausage. No meat should be that soft. It's just kind of like you could eat it with your tongue.
My grandpa was a big fan of these.
You don't even need teeth. I don't like that.
No, not a fan.
Again, the flavor's fine. It actually tastes mostly of tomato. But I don't like Vienna sausage. Yeah, I guess I've never had it.
Never will again.
Anyway, moving on to the compost.
That's the first time I've ever seen him with that negative of a reaction. It still wasn't a negative reaction, but that's the most negative reaction I've ever seen him have to food.
We're going to give that a D. Moving on to the compost, the sauce. I don't know why they call it a sauce, because it doesn't say to like mash it up or
it looks
anything
good
like that. And frankly, these apple nuggets, the dehydrated apple nuggets, they don't mash. They're not that soft. Let's give it a try.
That's better. Yeah.
Now that's actually really good. It tastes like applesauce. A little bit of cranberry in there. You know what? This would be really good on like pork or something. Not Vienna sausage.
Yeah.
Actual pork.
I like to cook pork chops with brown sugar and apple. It's really good.
Add a little cinnamon or nutmeg. It's weird. So they also have a just applesauce recipe, which is basically exactly this, but without the cranberries. And it adds
lemon powder,
nutmeg and cinnamon, nutmeg or cinnamon, as well as a little bit of the synthetic lemon powder. Yeah, actually, that's really good. I'm gonna actually finish that one. Then we're gonna go with the pineapple milk. I put it into a regular glass so you can see the color.
Hard pass
Very
for me
milky.
on that.
It also has this foam on top, which is staying pretty well. Cheers. It's actually really good.
He's surprised by that. I think that's better than he expected it to be.
Very good. So I'm curious. I'm going to try this. I would think that if you put pineapple juice in milk, it would curdle the milk. Maybe not. But since this isn't actually milk, since it's powdered milk,
Right.
It definitely doesn't curdle. Because it's actually quite nice. You really get the flavor of the pineapple juice, but none of the astringency from it. It's like smooth and creamy pineapple juice. That's actually really good. You want to make sure it's well dissolved. Yeah, make that. That's pretty good.
All right, as always, he does a fantastic job with his stuff. You get to learn and be entertained at the same time. I'll pin down in the comment section a link to the playlist of all of the Max Miller videos that I've done. Please check out his channel, subscribe if you find this kind of content interesting, and I know a lot of people do. Definitely worth checking out. I want to thank Pascal Lapointe and James Lacourse, a couple of la's there. Thank you both so much for your support on Patreon.